Well, the recent federal election has led to discussion about leadership and personalities and the question of the role a leader's personality has in their effectiveness as a leader. To tell us more, Joydeep Hor joining us from People and Culture Strategies. Joydeep, welcome back. Good to see you. Of course, the wash-up of the federal election, which in particular, the coalition questioning their leadership in the wake of their loss. But I mean, unlike, I guess, in America, does personality really play a part here?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I'm always fascinated when you have significant political events like an election, whether it's what's happened in Australia or the US over the last 6 to 12 months, and then when you reflect on what we can learn and what we observe about things such as personality traits of leaders and the consequences and the impact of that personality or those personality traits on broader outcomes and results. And I think that the question around the linkage between personality and leadership it's really interesting. We think about in a political context, obviously one would think intuitively that personality is a lot more important because you've got to win the hearts and minds of people who are going to be voting for you or not voting for you, whatever it might be. So the rank and file human being who sees a leader or potential leader or would-be leader of a country or a political party or whatever is naturally likely to be a bit more swayed by what they observe to be that person's personality. Is this someone who I like? Is this someone who I trust? Is this someone who I believe, can see as being genuine, etc.? But precisely the same kinds of things do apply in other contexts. And if we bring it back to the corporate context, to leaders of organizations, regardless of size, those same questions around trust, believability, credibility become extremely important. And I think that's where the linkage of personality and outcomes becomes very, very important. Although when you think about it, there really should be no linkage between personality and effective leadership, because effective leadership should be very much based around your decisions and whether those decisions have integrity and all of those kinds of things. But human beings and the way they make judgments is a little bit different to that. So personality absolutely does play, rightly or wrongly, a very big part.
Well, I mean, to that point, I guess, can leaders actually change? And I mean, not just politically, but also in terms of corporate leaders, perhaps. Do they need perhaps an outsized personality to lead a large organisation?
Yeah, well, if you look at the leaders of some of the larger organisations, publicly listed or otherwise, you wouldn't necessarily see a prototypical personality, and that would often reflect the background and pedigree of that particular individual prior to them being appointed to, say, a CEO role. A lot of people who have come from within, worked their way up through the ranks and might have been in a predecessor COO role or a CFO role, are probably unlikely to be bringing that same level of charisma or charismatic personality to their leadership style than someone who might have come from a separate, independent entrepreneurial background who has been appointed to a CEO role. And I think this is really interesting because often what people who work within those organizations look for, and indeed shareholders and others, will be looking to what they would see as best practice in personality in many ways. And they would say, well, this person leads this organization very well. This seems to be that person's personality. We need someone who's got that kind of personality to translate the good results that that person achieves there into what we can achieve here. But that bit about the transformation of personality is a really challenging one, because I see this all the time, where leaders are then forced into behaving differently or trying to make personality modifications. People see through that, and employees and people generally are a lot more savvy than they're often given credit for, and will often see that a person's making a very deliberate effort, and maybe even too much of an effort, to be something different to who they organically or naturally are. So it's something that it's important that organizations and leaders themselves reflect on. You know, you can have executive coaching, you can have mentors and whatever else, but is what they are going to do and is what they're trying to achieve going to be best for you and best for your organization? And really think that one through.
Yeah, interesting. When you touched on that trait of charisma, if you like, and how attractive that is, perhaps versus a technocrat, if you like, someone who's completely across the detail. I mean, does it depend on the organisation as to which would work best?
Yeah, I think it does depend on the organisation, and I think, truth be told, a lot depends on how an organisation or business is performing. The reality is, if an organisation is performing in terms of its numbers, in terms of its financial performance and deliverables very, very well, there's not going to be a huge amount of scrutiny around the calibre of leadership of that particular organisation. It's only when organisations are not performing well that the kinds of questions, whether it's from boards or whether it's going to come out in engagement surveys or whatever else, will start to be asked about the leadership. And when you're asking questions about leadership, you're going to start to open up broader conversations around is this the person who should be leading us? They don't seem to have charisma. Let me interpret that lack of charisma to be a lack of care, for example, or a lack of passion for their role. And we all know that just because you're not charismatic doesn't necessarily mean that you don't necessarily have the necessary care factor or passion for your role. It's just that you project that in a very different way. But these things come into sharper focus when an organisation and a business is not performing well.
And Joydeep, if you're not a natural leader, can you learn to become one?
Well, I think as with all of us and everyone who's worked anywhere, none of us are perfect, and we all need to be fully aware of what our limitations and growth areas are. And an awareness of those kinds of things, and awareness of our foibles, for want of a better word, is really important to at least be able to identify. And even if it's not something that you can necessarily change, just the awareness of it and being aware of what might be the consequences of those aspects of your personality or communication style or whatever else will go a long way. Even if a leader just incorporates into their vocabulary and their repertoire something that calls out that particular trait of theirs, that will endear them to a significant portion of their workforce or their colleagues. Because what people do like to see is vulnerability, and I prefer the word vulnerability to authenticity in terms of an effective leadership trait. So it's absolutely something that can be done, but the trick is to not overdo it, and indeed to play to one's own strengths.